Hey everyone, Dave Corinth here, and today we are going to tune up this Stanley number 4 Type 16 smooth plane. So here is our Stanley number 4 Type 16 made from 1933 to 1941. This one's in really good shape. It come out of New Mexico, so it doesn't have a whole lot of rust on it. The japanning on it is near perfect. The Tote and knob do not have any damage. The finish is still there. It's a little dry. It needs to be worked with a little bit, but it's in good shape. It has some discoloration on this side. You can see right there, but I know a trick to fix that, so we'll get that fixed. It does have a name etched into it right here. It says Harris. And on the other side, of course, this is a first, it has a social security number stamped into it, right, or etched into it right here. It says 525-60. That is a New Mexico issued social security number. I've covered up the last four in case the person that, put that in there could still be alive. I don't want someone to do some nefarious work with that. So I've covered this up so you can't read that. But other than that, this plane is in excellent shape. It is a Type 16. It has the raised section on the front of the toe and on the heel. It has the kidney shaped hole for the lever cap, and it has the OG shaped sides on the frog. The lever cap on this one has about 95% of its original nickel. It's got some rust starting to show through, but that can come off pretty easily. It does not have the number stamped or the patent number stamped on the underside. The earliest ones didn't. I have one of the ones that does here that's pretty rusted beyond help at this point, but you can see it has patent number 1918750, and this one does not have that. So I'm confident that this is original to this plane, or at least it's original to the period, because the later ones after the Type 16s, they started to put a U on it. And if you see one of these that's nickel plated, it doesn't have the patent number on it, a lot of times there will be a U stamped right here. And that tells you that it's probably a Type 18 or a 19. So this is definitely a Type 16, goes with this plane. The iron is near full length, and it has that patent number right below made in the USA. So it is correct. Sometimes they would have the date code right here on the back side, but this one's early enough that it doesn't have that. I think that started in 1934, and it was a 3-digit number. The first digit was the quarter of the year, and the last 2 digits were the year number. So if you had a 336, that would be the third quarter of 1936. But this doesn't have that, so it's probably before 1934. I've never seen 1933 date code. So if you've seen one, let me know, because I'd love to hear about it. Good shape, chip breaker's in excellent condition. The edge, though, the grind on it is not square. And if I take the chip breaker off with my appropriate chip breaker screwdriver, pop that off, and I put a square on this. Oh, looky there. It's got Mr. Harris's name. I didn't even see that. Apparently, Mr. Harris paid someone 35 cents, probably to grind this edge that's not square, because I could see it. So I put this on the square right there, and then I can rock it back and forth. And that's not the end of the world, but it's better if you can get that real close to square. And this is pretty, well, you can see it's off quite a bit. So maybe Mr. Harris should ask for his 35 cents back. But we're going to regrind this edge. It looks like it's actually a hollow grind. You can see right there, it's got kind of a curve to it. It is a good straight one. It's just not square with the sides. So that makes it more of a hassle when you're trying to use your lateral adjuster to get everything right. If that's not round square, you plane it with the lateral all the way over to one side or the other. Well, I don't want to do that. So we're going to regrind this and get it correct. It does have some, looks like some residue here that looks like wood residue. We'll get that taken off, like some resin from wood. We'll get that removed. I've got a trick to do that. It does have a couple paint splatters. One right there. There's one right there. But other than that, that's not going to hurt anything. That looks really good. Nice Japanning under there, no problems whatsoever. A lot of times you'll see wood chips built up, but I don't think this plane saw a lot of use, so that's not unusual to see nothing under there. And then, of course, there is the frog adjustment tab right here. If you'll notice, the frog adjustment tab has a blue color to it. That's how it's supposed to be. Stanley blued all of their frog adjustment tabs, pretty much from the Type 10 all the way up until the Type 19. The early Type 19s will also have this blued as well. But after that, you'll start to see these get this shiny, I don't know what it is. I don't think they're nickel plated, some kind of pot metal, but they're really shiny. But these should be gun blued. Frog's in good shape, no problems with that. And then we got the tote and the knob. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to clean this body up, and then we're going to clean these screws up. These screws are in really good shape. They don't need much done to them. I have a very, very fine wire wheel, and I will lightly hit those with that wire wheel. That won't take much, but I'd use a very, very fine wire wheel. And then we'll get this cleaned off here with some steel wool and some polish. And then we'll do the same thing on the iron. We'll clean that off. And then we'll start tuning this plane. To remove that pitch or resin, I use that CMT cleaner, and it does a great job. I just use my fingers. I don't use a piece of 4/0 steel wool or anything like that. I don't want to damage that Japanning. So fingers work great. When I'm done, I just wipe it off with a cloth, and you can see there's none of that resin or pitch left. These are the parts that I'm going to clean up on my wire wheel. And I emphasized earlier that I have a very, very fine wire wheel. I'm not a big fan of wire wheels. You can actually damage a part if you get too aggressive with it. And mine is very fine, and all I'm really doing is knocking the loose stuff off and cleaning those threads. I also never take it to brass. While this is sped up and it sounds like that motor is really cranking, it's really not. It's just because I have it sped up so fast because I don't think you want to sit there and watch me do this for like 5 minutes. But the motor, you'll notice it never changes pitch. That's because I'm not applying force and putting any load on that motor. If you're applying a load on that motor and you're putting too much force, you can damage those parts. So I'm just barely touching any of those pieces. So the lever cap, iron, and chip breaker have all been wire wheeled very lightly. I cannot emphasize that enough. And it still leaves some of these marks here. I don't mind that. I'm going to remove that in a different method. And no, I'm not using any Vapo Rub to do that. Here it is again. You can see it's so soft, it didn't even take these paint chips off. That's how soft that wire wheel I have is. But now you can actually see patent date number under Made in the USA. And of course, the lever cap turned out really well. Again, it's got a little spot right here still, but I'm going to take care of that. I didn't damage any of the orange infill. Back of it looks good, and I got that majority of that bad spot, which was right here. So overall, that came out great. The next thing I want to do is I want to remove this etching from the sides. And I like to get the body cleaned up at that point. I've already got all the grime and grit off there, but I want to go ahead and get these sides lapped down. And before I do that, I always make sure that the frog seats to the frog seat very well. So I'll check it for rocking. All I do is lay the frog in there, take my 2 fingers, set them right where the frog screws would go, and then try to rock it back and forth. And it does not move at all. So I'm very, very happy with that. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it. I'm just putting enough to seat it. And then I just try to move it back and forth. I'm still going to go ahead and check this for high spots as well here. But first I want to go ahead and get this lapped off. I normally use 180 grit sandpaper to lap the sides and the sole, especially on bench planes. On block planes and smaller stuff, I'll take it up to 220, but 180 is more than enough for a bench plane. So after lapping, you can see Mr. Harris's name is no longer, or his social security number is not on this side. His name's not on that side. So the next thing I want to do is I want to clean these top rails. The next thing I want to do before I put the frog back on the plane is I want to make sure that the top of this is good and flat. And to do that, I'm going to use this file. And all I'm going to do is, because I have the lateral in, I can't just run it across there, plus the yoke's in there. I'm going to set it right here on this side and then just push straight down. And that will remove any bumps or high spots that's in there. A lot of times, these get banged up in toolboxes, and the sides of these castings have little bumps on them. And you want to make sure those are off there. So I'll do the same thing on this side. And this one's seating really well. It's making good contact here and here, as well as down here and here. And that's where it's important. While I'm at it, I'm also going to take, and I like to run the file down these sharp edges. Just 1 or 2 passes, nothing crazy, just to soften it up a little bit. Just like that. And this is how I clean the brass, with some WD-40 and some 4/0 steel wool. I do the same thing to anything that's got gun glue on it because I do not want to remove that. You'll notice I didn't tighten that tab all the way down. Once I get the frog where I want it on the body, I'll lightly set those screws and then come in from the back side, then tighten that tab down. That frog can move side to side if that tab is loosened. Once you tighten the adjustment tab, that frog does not move nearly as much. There's that discoloration on this tote. The finish on this tote's good enough that I don't think it needs to be totally redone. Same way with the knob. It's just got a few paint splatters on it. And I use Howard feed and wax to do this. It penetrates into that finish and actually restores it a little bit. I'll give it a nice liberal coating and then go over it with some 4/0 steel wool to remove those paint chips and just kind of polish it up. While this is happening, that feed and wax is soaking into that finish. And I'll let these sit about 20 minutes. After that's had a chance to soak in, I'll just clean it all off with a cotton rag. And you can see that discoloration is completely gone. Next, I'll apply some Johnson's paste wax to the tote and the knob. And of course, let that sit for about 20 minutes. Once that's done, I'll do the same thing I did earlier with a cotton rag. I'll clean and polish it up. To remove the last bit of rust on the iron and the chip breaker, I'm going to use 400 grit sandpaper and some oil. And while it may sound like there's a Formula One race car outside my shop, there's not. It's my neighbor and his truck. I hit the back side of the chip breaker with 4/0 steel wool. I want this to look as factory as possible. When I do the lever cap, I use 2000 grit sandpaper on this, wet dry with some oil, and I don't go over it crazy. After that, I'll take it over to my buffing wheels and compound and polish it up. And then one last time on that very fine wire wheel. This kind of eases out those sandy marks. Here I'm going to square up the cutting edge. I made a jig for this for my sanding center, and I'm constantly dipping it in water to keep it cool. Just 2 or 3 passes at a time, and then water. As you can see, it does a really good job, and now it's square. And now comes the really fun part, and that's lapping the back of the iron. The back of the iron needs to be flat. If it's not, it will not perform like you want it to. I do this first with 320, then 600, and finish it off with 1000 grit. The back of this iron was not flat, but as long as I can get half an inch or so of that edge flattened, I'm satisfied with that. Since this is going to be a smooth plane, we want to avoid those pesky plane tracks. I round the corners of the iron with this super fine diamond stone. And it doesn't take long with this stone, just a few minutes. And that rounds those edges off. And once that's done, I'll take it right over to that 1000 grit stone again and remove any burrs. Next, I'll go to my 3000 grit water stone, lap that back one more time, and get a mirror finish. Once I've worked this on the 3000 grit, I'll then flip the stone over and use the 10,000 grit side to do the final hone. And of course, the ruler trick. I also want that chip breaker to seat to that iron perfect. So here I'm using my 600 grit stone to lap that edge. Then I'm going to flip it over using the same stone and get the leading edge on top. Once I get that done, I'll assemble the chip breaker and the iron and put them together. I leave about a 32nd of an inch. And I also want to make sure there's no light that shows between the chip breaker and the iron. And it's equally important to lap the lever cap. The lever cap will seat to the top of the chip breaker, and you want this to be as firm as possible. Now, while some people may not like corrugated soles, I personally do not have a problem with them. They are a lot easier to lap than one that's not corrugated. There's just a lot less metal there to mess with. What I'm after is the toe in front and back of the mouth, and of course the heel. And here you can see the toe, front and back of the mouth, and the heel. It's close, but it's not there yet. And now that I have the sole flattened, it's time to work on the edges. And I like to relieve the edges of the sole using a file. And once that's done, I'll hit the sole and the sides with some Scotch-Brite prior to waxing it. At this point, the plane is pretty much tuned, but I'm going to disassemble the whole plane, clean everything up, get rid of some of that metal dust on there from lapping, and give it a nice bath in some Johnson's paste wax. I let that Johnson's paste wax sit on there about 20 minutes, then it's time to wipe everything down. And at this point, I'll also oil all the screws. And all I use is 3-in-1 oil for this. Once I get it all assembled, I'm going to advance that iron until I can just feel it with my fingers. Here I'm going to test it out on some 160-year-old loblolly pine. It's a lot of fun to use one of these planes once you get one tuned up and it works like it should. As you can see, there's no plane tracks, and that surface is ready for a finish. Way better than sandpaper and a lot more fun to use. Thank you for watching this video. Comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll make more.